Millions. You think you're inheriting millions. No, every last cent, every stock, every property is going to Rufus's trust fund. The lawyer's voice cracked the air like a whip, and in that instant, the room erupted in chaos. My cousins gasped, their faces blanched as if they had seen a ghost. One aunt wailed, clutching her pearls so tightly I thought they'd snap. And my brother swore under his breath as the attorney slid the codicil across the mahogany table. At the bottom of the neatly typed page sat my late father's signature, uncheckable, witnessed and sealed. The empire they thought was theirs, mansions, accounts, shares, all of it now legally belonged to a trust fund. Formidable. But to understand how Rufus the Golden Retriever became richer than the entire bloodline combined, you'd have to start from the beginning. My father, Richard Coleman, was not a man easily impressed by bloodlines or pedigree. He built his fortune in real estate, turning derelict properties into monuments of wealth. By the time he was 70, his name carried weight in every bank, boardroom, and country club. But as shrewd as he was in business, he was merciless in family. He believed entitlement was the slow poison of dynasties. He had watched his brothers squander opportunities, seen nieces and nephews measure their worth in anticipated inheritance rather than effort, and he despised it. You all act like vultures circling a man not even dead yet, he muttered to me one evening, as Rufus rested his head on his lap. The only one who's never asked me for a damn thing is this dog. I remember laughing nervously. Dad, you can't seriously be saying Rufus is your most loyal heir. Why not? He's more loyal than your Uncle Spawn, isn't he? My father scratched behind Rufus's ears as the dog wagged happily, oblivious to the storm brewing. At the time, I brushed it off as one of his theatrical tirades. But I should have known better. The first cracks began to show after my father's second heart attack. Relatives who rarely called suddenly arrived with casseroles and gifts. My cousin Elaine, who hadn't spoken to him in 5 years, began making weekly visits. My Uncle Henry, perpetually broke despite his business ventures, started bringing expensive cigars and talking loudly about how family should stick together. Everyone knew what they were doing. It was a performance for the will. One night, as I helped my father into bed, he whispered, "You see them, don't you? Like actors on a stage. They don't want, they want the money. When I go, they'll rip each other apart. They just care in their own way. I tried to soften it. No, he snapped, eyes sharper than glass. They care about the empire. And I'll be damned if I let them ruin it." The following weeks, his lawyer, Mr. Whitmore, started showing up more frequently. A thin, fox-like man with spectacles perched on his nose, Whitmore carried a leather briefcase that rarely left his side. My relatives noticed, too. I caught whispers in hallways, phone calls that hushed as soon as I entered. They knew something was happening, but none of them knew what. "Are you changing the will?" I asked him one night, careful not to sound accusing. He smiled faintly. "I'm clarifying it. The day of the reading, the atmosphere was nothing short of a gladiatorial arena. The family gathered in the oak-paneled study of our estate. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, the scent of polished wood and old money filling the air. My cousins had dressed like royalty, as though preparing for a coronation. Uncle Henry strutted in with a gold watch that he couldn't possibly afford. Elaine wore black lace as if auditioning for grieving favourite. When Whitmore cleared his throat, the room hushed. He read the main will first, outlining the obvious debts cleared. A few sentimental heirlooms distributed, small cash gifts to long-term staff. My relatives shifted impatiently, waiting for the real feast, the fortune, the empire, the millions. And then Whitmore's tone changed. He unfolded a second document. "A codicil," he announced. The room bristled. Elaine leaned forward. Henry's jaw tensed, and my brother's eyes flickered with calculation. "This codicil," Whitmore continued, "was signed and witnessed 2 months before Mr. Coleman's passing. It stipulates that the remainder of the estate liquid assets, properties, investments, and holdings be transferred to a trust fund managed solely for the benefit of Rufus, Mr. Coleman's golden retriever." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Then, chaos. "What the hell is this?" Henry roared, slamming his fist on the table. "You're joking." Elaine cried, voice trembling with outrage. "A dog, A dog over flesh and blood? My brothers, glaring at me about this. Did you? All I could do was stare at the signature at the bottom of the page. My father's precise handwriting, his flourish on the R, undeniable and final. He had meant every word. Whitmore raised a hand to silence them. The trust is to be managed responsibly. Funds are allocated for Rufus's care and upon Rufus's passing. The remainder will be distributed according to the conditions Mr. Coleman outlined. What conditions? Elaine shrieked. Whitmore adjusted his glasses, his voice calm against the storm. Those conditions will only be revealed upon Rufus's death. The uproar that followed was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Grown adult heirs of warden screaming about failed protest. Some threatened lawsuits, others swore to challenge the Codicil. But in that moment, watching their faces twist with greed and despair, I realized my father had orchestrated this chaos with surgical precision, and Rufus. He sat by the fireplace, tail wagging, blissfully unaware that he had just become the wealthiest dog in the country. Why fait even premier d'un six fois en beginning? My father's codicil wasn't a joke, it was a weapon. A carefully loaded trap designed to expose every ugly truth about the people who thought they could inherit his empire. The days after the reading were a fever dream of threats, whispered schemes, and courtroom gossip. My phone rang endlessly, relatives demanding explanations. Reporters sniffing for scandal. Even distant acquaintances suddenly remembering we were such close friends. But through it all, one thing became clear. No one saw Rufus's trust fund as anything other than a theft. Uncle Henry was the first to snap. He cornered me in the driveway one evening, his breath reeking of whiskey. Listen to me, he growled, gripping my arm. This dog, thing this asterisk, joke asterisk it won't stand. I've already got a lawyer, drafting a challenge. Testamentary capacity, undue influence, whatever the hell it takes. That Codicil is a fraud. Fraud. I shook his hand off. You saw the signature. You know it's valid. He sneered, face twisted with desperation. Don't play dumb. You think the courts are going to let a mutt sit on millions while asterisk flesh and blood asterisk starves? You're in this, aren't you? Admitted to, and Whitmore cooked this up. The accusation burned, but I refused to rise to it. Dad knew exactly what he was doing. Henry, if you want to fight it, fight the law, not me. He spat at the gravel, muttering curses, and stormed away. Elaine's approach was softer, but more insidious. She invited me to tea, her parlor dressed like a stage set for reconciliation. We're family, she cooed, pouring steaming Darjeeling into china cups. This dog business is absurd. But maybe we can fix it. Together. Fix it how? I asked warily. She leaned closer, her perfume cloying. Convince Whitmore to amend the trust, make Rufus's fund a formality. Courtstuff Duckno. We take care of the money, and in exchange, we'll ensure Rufus lives like a king. Isn't that what your father wanted? Her words dripped like honey, but I heard the venom beneath. You want me to betray Dad's wishes, I said flatly. Her smile cracked. Don't be dramatic. We're just redirecting them. For the good of the family, I set my cup down and stood. No, Elaine. You want the money for your good. Dad trusted me to stand by his decisions. I won't betray him or Rufus. Her face hardened. Then you're no better than Whitmore. You'll regret this. By the third week, the vultures had descended in full force. Headlines screamed across tabloids. Asterisk millionaire leaves fortune to dog asterisk. Asterisk family outraged over bizarre codicil asterisk golden retriever, now richer than 90% of Americans. Asterisk photographers camped outside the estate, shouting questions and flashing cameras whenever I stepped out. Rufus became a national curiosity, his morning walks documented like royal processions. And then the lawsuits came. Henry filed first, arguing undue influence that I and Whitmore had manipulated my father in his fragile state. Elaine followed, claiming my father lacked the mental capacity to amend his will. Others piled on, each relative inventing a new angle to claw back what they believed was theirs. Whitmore, cool as ever, reassured me in his office. Let them rage, he said, adjusting his spectacles. Your father anticipated this. Every challenge, every loophole they've been sealed. This codicil is ironclad. But how? I asked. They've got teams of lawyers. They won't stop. Whitmore tapped his briefcase. Because Mr. Coleman wasn't just protecting Rufus, he was testing them. And soon, you'll see exactly how. The first hearing was a spectacle. The courthouse steps overflowed, with journalists, cameras flashing like lightning. Inside, my family paraded their outrage before the judge. Henry shouted about betrayal. Elaine wept about her father, robbed of clarity, and my brother delivered polished speeches about justice for the rightful heirs. When it was Whitmore's turn, he rose calmly and placed the codicil on the bench. Your Honor, this document is clear. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized. Medical records confirm Mr. Coleman's sound mind at the time. There is no coercion, no fraud, no doubt. The estate belongs to Rufus's trust, exactly as the deceased wished. The judge skimmed the papers, nodded, and said simply, "The codicil stands. The wails that erupted from my relatives could have shaken the rafters." Henry cursed so loudly, he was nearly held in contempt. Elaine collapsed into a faint that no one rushed to catch. My brother sat rigid, his jaw clenched, eyes blazing with fury, not at Whitmore, not at Rufus, but at me. Because in his mind, I wasn't just Dad's child, I was the gatekeeper. The one standing between him and the Empire. That night, as I returned home, with Rufus trotting beside me, a chill crept down my spine. The lawsuits had failed, but the war was far from over. My father's codicil hadn't ended the family's greed, it had ignited it. And in the shadows of the estate, in whispered phone calls and hushed meetings, I could feel something darker stirring. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about revenge. The key revealed itself not in a blaze of fireworks, but in the quiet shuffle of parchment against wood. A week after the knife incident, Whitmore summoned me to his office. He didn't call often, and when he did, it usually meant something significant. His office, lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy curtains that smelled faintly of cigar smoke, was a sanctuary of order. On his desk sat a thick envelope, sealed with my father's signet stamp. "Für Father Lefchens, Whitmore set tapping envelope, with a dille. To be opened only if the codicil was challenged and, as you well know, it has been..." My breath caught. What kind of instructions? Read. I broke the seal. Inside were several documents, handwritten by my father in his unmistakable cursive. The first was a letter addressed to me. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it means the vultures circled faster than even I imagined. "Don't despair, that was always the plan. Rufus is the bait, but you are the blade. They will reveal themselves in their greed, and when they do, the true heir will emerge. Trust Whitmore. And trust yourself." Asterisk, I stared at the words until they blurred. Rufus whined at my feet, as if sensing the gravity of what I'd just uncovered. What does he mean by true heir? Première asquette? Whitmore slid another document across the desk. It was thicker, notarized, stamped. Your father created a secondary trust, hidden behind the first. Once the family destroys itself in its pursuit of Rufus, as fundand, they will the remainder of the estate transfers not to Rufus, but to the heir he deemed worthy. I skimmed the page, my pulse thundering in my ears. Arzabotom, in precisely, he lighted. Tome. Whitmore adjusted his spectacles, conditionally. You cannot claim it until the family's hostility burns out, until every attempt to seize Rufus's fund fails. Only then does the secondary trust activate. Until that day, you must guard Rufus. He is both shield and lure. The room tilted. My father had turned his fortune into a chessboard, his relatives into pawns, and me into the final move. I can't, I stammered. They've already tried to hurt Rufus. What if they succeed? Whitmore's gaze hardened. Then you fail. And the Empire dies with him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to Rufus's steady breathing, watching his golden fur rise and fall in the moonlight. He was blissfully unaware of the Empire he carried on his back, unaware that grown adults were plotting his destruction. I stroked his fur and whispered, "Don't worry, boy. I won't let them touch you." Not while I'm breathing, but I was naive to think my words could hold back what came next. 2 days later, I returned from town to find the back door of the estate ajar. Panic surged through me. Rufus wasn't in the foyer where he usually greeted me. My calls echoed through the house, unanswered. I tore through every room, my heart clawing its way up my throat. Finally, from the library, a muffled bark. I burst in to find Rufus cornered, trembling, with my brother standing over him. He froze as I entered, his hand poised with a syringe. "What the hell are you doing?" "Première scrimed." He turned, but calm, almost cold. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. This dog has ruined everything." Dad was senile, manipulated, whatever you want to call it. He shush, no, some mute. "I'm fixing it. You're trying to kill him." "No," he said, voice like steel. "I'm trying to free us. If Rufus is gone, the Codicil collapses. The estate goes back to the family back where it belongs." For un moment, het den première linged. We crashed into the bookshelf, volumes raining, down around us. The syringe skittered across the floor, spinning beneath a leather chair. Rufus barked furiously, leaping between us. My brother pinned me, fury etched into every line of his face. "You think you're Dad's golden child, don't you? But you're nothing. Without the money, without this damn dog, you're nothing." Summoning every ounce of strength, I shoved him off. He staggered, tripped over Rufus, and went crashing into the desk. Papers flew. The syringe rolled out from under the chair, glinting under the chandelier. I snatched it first, snapping it in half before he could move. The liquid spilled uselessly onto the rug. "Get out!" I hissed, my chest heaving. "If you ever come near him again, I swear you won't walk away next time." His eyes blazed with hatred, but he saw something in my face that stopped him. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the shelves rattled. I collapsed onto the rug, Rufus pressing his warm body against mine, licking my face as if to pull me back from the edge. My hands shook as I buried my face in his fur. For the first time, I understood the full weight of my father's plan. This was greedive, me fam wanting going to stop. They would come again and again, until either Rufus was gone or they were. And I was the only thing standing between them. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every brush of wind against the shutters had me reaching for the iron poker I placed beside the bed. Rufus lay curled against me, his body warm, steady, trusting me when the world outside was sharpening knives. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep this contained. The police had to know. But when I called the station, my brother had already been there. He'd painted himself as the victim, claiming I had attacked him during a heated argument over the estate. The officer on the other end spoke in the tone of a man politely humoring a family squabble. "It sounds like a civil matter," he said. "Best handled through lawyers, not police." I hung up, furious. He'd thought ahead, twisted the story before I even had a chance to breathe. Whitmore was less surprised than I expected when I told him. He steepled his fingers, regarding me with that fox-like gaze. "This is precisely what your father intended. Exposure. Every mask they wear will fall away under pressure. You must endure." "Endure," I snapped. "They nearly killed Rufus. They will, Jan, as the culture of greed. But makti the mum frost everything. Your father's secondary. Trust activates not only upon their failure to seize the first, but upon proof of malice. Attempted harm, conspiracy, violence, all of it strengthens your claim and destroys theirs." His words chilled me. My father hadn't just set a trap. He'd designed a crucible. That evening, the estate was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. Rufus stuck close to me, ears twitching at every sound. At dusk, the power flickered, then died, plunging the house into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight, my heart pounding. Outside, through the long windows of the dining room, faint figures moved near the tree line. I couldn't tell how many, but their shadows stretched like specters across the lawn. I called Whitmore, immediately. "They're here," I whispered. "Lock the doors. Do not est instructed." "I'll handle the rest," but the phone line cut before I could reply. The first stone shattered the window by the kitchen. Glass sprayed across the counter. Rufus barked, a deep, furious sound I'd never heard from him before. I grabbed the poker, my flashlight beam darting through the shards. Then came the second stone. This time, with a note tied to it, asterisk last chance. Surrender the trust or bury the dog. Asterisk, my blood turned to ice. I had a choice. Call their bluff or fight. I tore the note in half, dropped it into the fireplace, and stoked the flames until it was ash. "Not tonight," I muttered. Not ever. The rest of the night was siege-like. They circled the estate, rattling gates, pounding shutters, throwing taunts into the darkness. Boot-headed breacher? Whether it was fear of Rufus's snarling or Whitmore's unseen hand at work, I never knew. By dawn, the shadows had retreated, leaving the lawn littered with broken glass and trampled grass. Exhausted, I sat with Rufus in the library, the first light spilling over the ruined window. He rested his head in my lap, tail wagging weakly as if to say, asterisk, we made it through. Asterisk, that morning, Whitmore arrived with an envelope. Not thick this time, but slim, official, stamped with the court seal. He handed it to me with the same gravity he'd shown when revealing the secondary trust. What's this? I asked, my voice raw from the night. He smiled faintly. Your father's plan advancing to the next stage. Inside was a summons. My brother, Elaine, and Henry had filed for emergency guardianship of Rufus, arguing that I was unfit to care for him. They claimed I had endangered the dog, neglected his safety, even subjected him to trauma. Their proof. The break-in, the glass, the attacks all framed as asterisk my asterisk failures. I laughed bitterly, tossing the papers onto the desk. They're unbelievable. First they try to kill him, then they claim I'm the danger. That, Whitmore said, is exactly what your father predicted. And exactly why you're going to win. I stared at him, incredulous. How? He leaned in, his voice low, steady. Because the more they lie, the easier it is to reveal the truth. And when the court sees who they've become, when they understand what they've done, your family won't just lose Rufus's trust. They'll lose everything, reputation, legitimacy, their claim to the Coleman name. Rufus barked once. Sharpel, asifagring. For the first time since the reading of the Codicil, I felt it not fear, not despair, but clarity. This wasn't about defending Rufus anymore. This was about dismantling the family's greed piece, until there was none to left, for behind on me fete. My father had given me the perfect weapon to do it. The estate was mine, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like aftermath. The halls of the Coleman mansion no longer hummed with anticipation of family gatherings or the brittle politeness of relatives waiting for my father's approval. They echoed now with silence, broken only by Rufus's nails clicking across the marble floors or the occasional distant groan of the old pipes. It wasn't loneliness, it was cleansing. Still, shadows lingered. The press never, entirely, let go of the story. Even months later, reporters tried to bait me with questions about the dog dynasty. Some articles praised my father's genius, calling him a pioneer of anti-entitlement, estate planning. Others mocked him as a cruel eccentric who'd humiliated his own bloodline. I learned to answer with silence, let them argue. The truth was deeper than headlines. Rufus, though, remained the star. His trust became the subject of endless curiosity. Tabloids spun stories about diamond-studded collars and private chefs. The reality was gentler. Long walks in the gardens, regular vet visits, toys scattered in the drawing room. His favorite armchair covered in a plaid blanket. He didn't live like a king. He lived like a beloved dog. And then one autumn morning, his breathing changed. I woke to find him lying beside the bed, his chest rising shallowly. He lifted his head, tail thumping weakly, eyes soft with recognition. But his strength was fading. The vet came quickly, whispering kind words, checking vitals with the reverence of someone who knew Rufus was more than a patient, he was a symbol. It's time, she said gently. I cradled, his head in my lap, tears falling freely. You did it, boy, I whispered. You kept us safe. You kept Dad's promise. His eyes closed slowly, and with one final sigh, Rufus was gone. The silence that followed was crushing. The trust, the estate, the battles, they had all revolved around him. And now he was only memory, woven into the fabric of the house like sunlight on dust motes. But Rufus's death also unlocked the final clause. Whitmore arrived, solemne sévère, with an envelope to me without a word. Inside was a letter, shorter than the others. Asterisk, if you are reading this, Rufus has gone to where I wait. Grieve him, for he was your truest ally, but do not grieve the money. The empire is now yours not because you are blood, but because you proved yourself worthy when all others failed. You stood against greed, against threat, and protected what mattered. That is the only measure of an heir. Use it well. Do not become what they were. And remember, A fortune is only power when it serves something greater than itself. Asterisk. For a long time, I sat at the desk, the letter trembling in my hands. In the weeks that followed, I set about reshaping the empire. Properties that had been treated as trophies became housing initiatives. Stocks that once lined offshore accounts were funneled into scholarships, medical programs, shelters, many named quietly after Rufus. I didn't do it to burnish the Coleman name. I did it because my father had been right. Wealth without purpose rots the soul. As for my family, my brother, Elaine, Henry, they never recovered their old status. They drifted like ghosts on the edge of the city, occasionally surfacing in bitter interviews or small scandals. But they no longer had claws to reach me. One evening, months later, I stood by Rufus's favorite spot in the garden, the old oak where he used to dig holes he never filled. The sun bled across the horizon, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I felt my father beside me, proud, amused, satisfied. You were wrong about one thing, Dad, I murmured into the twilight. Rufus wasn't just bait. He was the heart of it all. Without him, none of this would have worked. The leaves rustled, as if in agreement. And as I walked back to the house that was no longer fortress or battlefield. But home I carried both their legacies with me, my father's cunning and Rufus's loyalty. A fortune built on stone and a trust built on love. The empire, finally, was mine. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a curse, it felt like freedom. Freedom didn't come overnight, it settled slowly, like dust after a storm. For weeks, I wandered the estate with a strange hollowness in my chest. Rufus's absence was everywhere, the empty blanket on his chair, the silence when I opened the back door, the unguarded quiet of nights without his soft breathing. It was grief, yes, but also clarity. Because with his passing, the final act of my father's theater had closed. The curtain had fallen, and I was left standing on the stage with an empire in my hands. The first thing I did was dismantle the spectacle. Reporters had camped outside for years, treating Rufus like a golden idol. Now they wait for me, circling like sharks, eager for a misstep. Forgive them one no interview. No lavish parties, no dog dynasty memoir. Sell I'm weapon, and il reste scandale sell. Responsibility does not. Inside, however, the work began. Whitmore met me every morning with files, properties, contracts, opportunities. For the first time, the empire was entirely mine to steer. My father had left it intact, untouched, waiting for a hand that would use it with purpose rather than hunger. You understand what he wanted now, don't you? Whitmore asked one morning as we walked the grounds. I nodded. He didn't just want to expose them. He wanted to force me to choose. Between preserving his power or transforming it, and what will you choose? I glanced toward Rufus's oak tree, where we'd buried his collar beneath the roots. Transformation. If Dad hated anything, it was stagnation. This empire has to live, not rot. So it began. I sold the downtown penthouse that had stood empty for years, using the proceeds to fund a community arts center. The old lake house, once a summer playground for relatives who never paid for its upkeep, was donated to a children's hospice. I converted half of my father's vintage car collection into an endowment for animal shelters, each one named quietly in Rufus's honor. The press tried to spin it. Asterisk wealthy heir seeks redemption. Asterisk Coleman, fortune recast as philanthropy. Asterisk, but they never understood the truth. It wasn't redemption. It was obedience. Obedience to the strange, brilliant will of Anne Houdinone. Greed would devour his bloodline and on mi famille. Henry drank himself into obscurity. Elaine reinvented herself under a new surname, showing up at smaller, quieter fundraisers where no one remembered her disgrace. My brother never forgave me. He sent letters sometimes, venom disguised as reason. Asterisk, you stole what was ours. You think you're noble, but you're just the lucky one Dad chose. Asterisk, I never responded. His words had no teeth left. Your passé shape. What had once been a monument to Richard Coleman's ambition became a network of living legacy schools, shelters, homes. People whispered that the Coleman fortune had finally grown a conscience. They were wrong. It hadn't grown one. It had always had one. His name was Rufus. On the anniversary of my father's death, I returned to the garden. The oak tree stood tall, its roots embracing the soil, where Rufus's collar lay. I brought no entourage, no flowers, no press, just myself, a single folding chair, and the quiet. I did it, Dad, I said softly. We did it. Rufus and I, the Empire, is alive, and it's clean. They can't touch it anymore. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and pine. For a moment, I could almost hear Rufus Dark echoing through the garden, bright and fearless. I smiled through the ache. Because in the end, it hadn't been greed or blood that defined the Coleman legacy. It had been loyalty. The loyalty of a man who refused to let his family rot in entitlement. The loyalty of a dog who never asked for anything but love. And my the unlikely heir who had to guard them both. The fortune was mine now, yes. But the lesson was greater. Wealth is not inheritance. It is responsibility. And as I walked back to the mansion, the sun sinking behind me, I knew I would carry that responsibility for the rest of my life, not as a burden, but as freedom. The kind of freedom only loyalty can buy. The seasons turn, en huitième of the Empire. What had once been a fortress filled with whispered plots and family, betrayal gradually softened into something gentler, almost unrecognizable. The staff, once caught in the crossfire of Coleman greed, began to smile again. The cooks filled the halls with scents of bread and roasted herbs. The gardeners restored the roses along the gravel drive. And the house itself heavy, with silence for so long breathed again. But even as I carved a new future, the past never fully left me. At night, when the fire burned low in the study, I often replayed the Codicil reading in my head, Elaine's shriek, Henry's fury, my brother's cold glare. Those faces haunted me more than any victory. Not because I feared them anymore, but because I pitied them. They had been given every chance to prove themselves, and every time they had chosen ruin. One evening, Whitmore joined me for dinner in the dining hall, though we now used only a small corner of the long table. He sipped his wine, eyes glinting in the firelight. Do you ever think, he asked, about what would have happened if your father had left the fortune to them? No codicil. No Rufus. Just a simple division of wealth. All the time, I admitted. They'd have torn it apart in months. Sold the properties, drained the accounts, squandered everything. Rufus wasn't just the heir. He was the only one who could hold up a mirror. Whitmore smiled faintly. And you were the only one who could stand to look. His words lingered long after he left. I tried not to dwell on my family, but fate had other plans. One winter afternoon, I received a letter, not venomous this time, but desperate. It was from Elaine. She wrote of debt collectors, of friends who had abandoned her, of a loneliness that frightened her more than poverty ever had. At the end, a single plea. Asterisk, you've won. We've lost. Please help me. Asterisk, I folded the letter carefully and set it aside. That night, I walked the halls thinking of my father. He would never have helped her. Mercy wasn't his way. But Rufus loyal, forgiving, untainted would not have turned his back, so I didn't send her money. I sent her work. A modest role in one of the shelters funded by the trust, her wages fair, but humble. If she accepted, she would live not in grandeur, but in service. A test, once more. Weeks later, a photo reached me through the shelter's monthly report. Elaine. Ertierbach, kneeling beside camera, smiling not for camera, not for Sadie Mealy, as took should he found something real. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope. My brother never reached out again. His bitterness calcified into silence. Henry drank himself into a hospital bed, and I paid the bill anonymously, leaving him to believe it was luck or charity from strangers. Time, relentless as it is, carried me forward. The Empire continued to change shape, becoming less of a monument to Richard Coleman and more of a living organism. Schools grew, shelters multiplied. The name Coleman, once a synonym for greed, began to gather a strange kind of respect. On the 10th anniversary of Rufus's death, I returned again to the oak tree. The trunk was wider now, the branches stronger. At its base, I placed a bronze plaque, asterisk here lies Rufus, the truest heir, loyal beyond blood, protector beyond greed, asterisk as I stood there, the wind rustling the branches, I realized something. My father had believed Rufus was the key, and in a way, he was. But the real inheritance wasn't the money, or even the empire. It was the lesson he'd forced us all to learn, even if most had failed it. That wealth without loyalty is corruption. That family without honor is hollow. That love, in its purest form, can outmatch greed. I touched the plaque, whispering a promise into the bark of the oak. I'll carry it, boy. Both your legacy and his, always. And as I walked back toward the mansion, the winter sun breaking through the clouds, I felt lighter than I had in years. The Empire was no longer a burden. It was a story. One I would continue to write, not with codicils or courts, but with every act of loyalty that Rufus had taught me. Years slipped into each other, like pages in a well-worn book, and the Coleman estate aged alongside me. The roses returned fuller each spring. The halls no longer smelled of dust and bitterness, but of polish, fresh linens, and life. The staff stayed those who had weathered the storms of my family. S-Rage found steadiness in the quiet that followed. And me? I grew into the role my father had carved, not with entitlement, but with a strange, sharpened humility. The Empire had become something entirely new. What once represented dominance and fear was now synonymous with service. Coleman-funded schools filled with children who might never have had a chance otherwise. Shelters bearing Rufus's name stretched across the country. Families found homes in places that had once been hollow, symbols of excess. Every time I signed off on a new initiative, I imagined Rufus bounding down the halls, tail wagging, urging me on. But even peace carries echoes of the past. One autumn morning, a letter arrived with no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, my brother's, though shakier now, jagged. Asterisk, I see what you've done with it. You think you've honored him. Maybe you have. But know this, you didn't just inherit the Empire. You inherited the curse. You'll never outrun it. Asterisk, I read it twice, then tucked it into a drawer. I didn't answer. His curse had been his greed, his need to measure worth in money. Mine was something else entirely, the responsibility of ensuring that Empire didn't decalcify into the same rot. If that was a curse, it was one I would bear gladly. Whitmore grew older, his step slower, but his mind still sharp. He would visit less frequently, until one day he arrived with no briefcase, no files, only a cane, and a look that told me he had come to say goodbye. You've done well, he said simply, sitting by the fire. Better than your father imagined. Better than even I imagined. I had help, I replied softly, glancing toward Rufus's chair. Whitmore smiled faintly, the truest kind. Animals never ask for more than love. In that way, your father's choice was perfect. He left me with a final envelope, but unlike the ones my father had sealed, this one bore Whitmore's hand. For when you're ready, he said. I still haven't opened it. Perhaps I never will. The years were kind but relentless. My hair silvered. The estate, though still vast, felt less like an empire and more like a legacy, a museum of choices, both terrible and beautiful. I no longer feared my family's shadows. They had scattered, some to ruin, some to obscurity, some to lives quieter than they ever wanted. On the 20th anniversary of Rufus's passing, I gathered the staff. The children from the scholarship programs, the families from the shelters, and unveiled a statue in the garden under the oak. Castine bronze, Rufus stood proudly, tailed as if he were frozen in old George. At the base, the words my father once said etched in stone. Asterisk loyalty is the only true inheritance. Asterisk. The crowd applauded, but I barely heard them. My chest tightened, my eyes blurred. Because in that moment, the entire story, my father's trap, my family's fall, Rufus's trust, the battles, the grief. The rebuilding folded neatly into that single truth. And I realized my the cusp duty. One that would outlive me, outlive the Empire, outlive even the name Coleman. That night, as the garden lights glowed against the bronze, I whispered to the statue, as I once had to the oak. We did it. Boy, it's safe now. It always will be, and in the rustle of the leaves in the faint scent of roses on the breeze. I felt it the echo of paws across the marble, the soft weight of a golden head on my lap, the steady reassurance of a loyalty that had never left. The Empire was no longer about wealth. It was about love. And that, I knew, was the only inheritance worth guarding. In time, I discovered that real love, born of loyalty, rather than blood or money, has a way of rippling outward. The Empire that once bred bitterness now became fertile ground for trust. Former staff members who had once whispered fearfully in corners now laughed freely in the gardens. The children who attended the schools funded by Rufus's trust began to grow, graduate, and return as teachers, lawyers, doctors, builders each one, shaping a world my father could never have envisioned, yet one Rufus had unwittingly made possible. I found myself less a ruler of an estate and more a steward of a story. Everywhere I went, I saw Rufus's paw prints, not literal, but etched in the lives we touched. A family reunited in a shelter named Golden Haven, a boy who'd been homeless, now holding his first Les Grands Enfants Santé. A dog with scars from abuse finding a forever home, his new owner whispering, we named him Rufus. Sometimes, I wonder if that there's treason you not that caught its son in me. By making Rufus the heir, he forced me to see beyond money, to guard not just wealth, but meaning. Yet as the years passed, the house grew quieter again. Whitmore died one winter, leaving his final envelope still unopened in my drawer. Elaine passed away too, though she had spent her final years working faithfully at the shelter I'd placed her in. Her obituary was modest, her smile genuine in the photo they chose. Henry faded into rumor, and then nothing at all. My brother I never heard from him again. Perhaps he carried his bitterness to the grave. Perhaps he found peace somewhere far away. I chose not to know. I aged into solitude, but it was not a bitter solitude. The Empire no longer chained me. It had become something vast, humming, alive, and it required less of my hand now than ever before. Sippy Paul Wediringet. On the 30th anniversary of Rufus's death, I returned once more to the oak tree. The bronze statue stood proud beneath its branches, weathered by rain, but still shining in the sun. Children played nearby, their laughter mingling with birdsong. I sat in the same folding chair I had brought years ago, the same spot where I'd once whispered into the bark. My body was frailer now, my breath shorter, but my heart was steady. I'm nearly boy, premier c'est sauf Clady. Nearly ready to join you and Dad, but I wanted to see it one last time. To see what we built. To make sure it was safe. A breeze rustled through the oak leaves, warm and gentle, like a hand brushing my shoulder. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I swore I heard it, the faint patter of paws against marble. The steady thump of a tail, the sound of loyalty echoing through time, and I smiled. Because I knew, beyond doubt, that when my last day came, I would not step into the dark alone. I would walk forward, and Rufus would be there waiting, loyal as ever. The Empire would remain behind, transformed, unbreakable, but my true inheritance was already mine. And it had always been Rufus. Winter crept in slowly that year, draping the estate in white. The gardens, once a riot of colour, now lay beneath a quiet hush of snow. The oak tree stood strong against the cold, bronze Rufus at its roots gleaming, faintly, even under frost. I took comfort in the stillness. It reminded me of Rufus himself, steady, unshaken, patient. I spent my final years in a rhythm that was both simple and profound. Mornings began with walks along the estate's frozen paths. Afternoons with meetings about scholarships or shelters, evenings with books by the fire. The Empire no longer demanded my strength, only my guidance, and I gave it gladly. But as the days shortened, I began to feel a new kind of weight, one not born of duty, but of inevitability. My body grew weaker, my hands trembled when holding a pen, my breath caught climbing the staircase. I knew what was coming. I had made peace with it long ago, and yet I had one last task. I finally opened Whitmore's final envelope. Inside, in his tidy, slanted script, he had left me a message, asterisk when the day comes that you are ready to leave. Remember to your fathers, he was rather many, and Rufus's was never the trust. It was you. You are the bridge between their loyalty and the world it shaped. Leave it not as a monument, but as a living gift. And go to them in peace. Asterisk, I folded the letter with trembling hands, tears blurring the words. So première préparée. I arranged for the Empire's stewardship to pass into the hands of those I had raised up, students turned leaders. Shelter volunteers turned directors, men and women who had proven loyalty without bloodlines. The Coleman Empire was no longer a family inheritance. It was a human one. On the last night I spent in the mansion, I walked through every room, slowly, my fingers brushing the carved wood, the framed photos, the stone hearths. Memories lived in each corner, the reading of the Codicil, the battles, the silences, the victories, and at the end, I returned to the garden, to the oak tree. I sat in my chair beneath the bronze rufus, bundled in blankets against the cold. The stars were sharp above me, scattered like diamonds. My breath came shallow, each inhale an effort, but I wasn't afraid. I'm ready now, I whispered into the night. And then just as sleep pulled me under, I heard it. The sound of paws crunching softly across snow. I opened my eyes, and there he was, golden for shimmering, eyes bright, tail wagging as though no time had passed at all. Rufus trotted toward me, joy radiating from every step. Behind him stood my father, younger than I remembered, smiling with that rare warmth he'd hidden from most of the world. "Come on," he said, "you've carried it far enough. It's time to rest." I reached out, my hand sinking into Rufus's fur, warm and real, as tears spilled freely. And when I stood, leaving the chair behind, I felt no pain, no weight, only freedom. The Empire remained, alive and thriving. The world would remember the fortune, the codicil, the scandal. But I knew the truth. The true inheritance had never been money. It had always been loyalty, and in the end, that was enough. They buried me beneath the oak tree, beside Rufus's collar, and beneath the bronze statue that had watched over the estate for decades. My name was carved into stone, not with grandeur, but with simplicity, just as I had requested. Asterisk, a steward of loyalty. A keeper of love. Asterisk, the day of my funeral. The grounds filled, not with the sour, faces of greedy relatives, they were long gone. Scattered to dust, but with people whose lives had been touched by what the Empire had become. Children, once lifted from poverty, now stood as adults, leading foundations and schools. Families who had found homes through our programs gathered in quiet gratitude. Dogs rescued and love paraded the lawn, tails wagging in honor of the one who had started it all. The air was cold, the kind of cold that makes breath visible, and yet the crowd radiated warmth. No cameras, no spectacle, no scandal, just remembrance. One young woman stepped forward after the ceremony, placing a single sunflower at the base of Rufus's statue. She had been one of the first scholarship recipients, I later learned, and now she ran a shelter of her own. She whispered words no one else heard, but I like to imagine they were a promise that the work would continue, that the inheritance was safe. Because it was. The Empire no longer depended on a single heir, a single name, or even a single fortune. It had become a chain of loyalty, stretching far beyond bloodlines, forged by the lessons of a man, a dog, and the strange codicil that bound them. Seasons turned. The oak grew taller, its branches spreading wide, sheltering the statue and the graves beneath. The bronze Rufus weathered storms, his tail forever midwag, his gaze forever fixed on the horizon. Children played around the roots, climbing, laughing, sometimes asking their parents, "Wo wa Rufus?" and the story would be told again and again. Of a wealthy man who refused to let greed consume his bloodline. Of a golden retriever who became the richest dog in the world without ever knowing it. Of a child, his heir not chosen by birthright, but proven by loyalty. In time, the Coleman name faded into history, as all names do, but the legacy endured because loyalty endures. And under the oak tree, in the hush of the garden, I rest with Rufus at last. Not as heir and protector, not as steward and guardian. Just as companions, together, forever. The decades that followed my burial turned the estate into something I never could have predicted in life, a sanctuary. The Coleman mansion, once the stage for betrayal and greed, became a foundation's heart. They opened the doors, not for heirs or banquets, but for learning, healing, and refuge. The great dining hall hosted lectures for students who never would have set foot in such halls. The libraries were filled again, not with dust but with eager hands flipping pages. The gardens bloomed each spring with children laughing beneath the oak, their laughter echoing where once there had been only silence and bitterness. The statue of Rufus weathered the years gracefully. Moss crept along the bronze, storms beat against it, and still he stood, tail wagging, head high, eternal. People came to leave flowers, toys, even leashes of their own beloved pets. The plaque at his paws became a pilgrimage site. Not for wealth seekers, but for those who believed in something purer: loyalty, love, service. My family's names the ones who had tried to steal, poison, chain, and betray were forgotten. Their scandals faded into yellowed archives, their descendants scattered into anonymity. But Rufus's name grew brighter with each generation. Rufus's trust became a phrase synonymous with integrity, with stewardship, with hope. And in quiet moments, long after visitors left, the garden kept its secrets. The oak swayed in the wind, whispering softly. Children sometimes swore they felt a warm presence by the statue, a gentle nudge against their hand, a tail brushing their leg. Dogs would bark joyfully at nothing, tails wagging furiously as if greeting an unseen friend. They weren't wrong. For though my body rested beneath the soil, though Rufus's collar lay buried deep in the roots, our spirits never left. We lingered in the estate not as ghosts, but as guardians. I walked the halls in silence, Rufus trotting at my side, unseen but felt, a presence of steadiness for those who carried the legacy forward. The empire no longer needed me. It had grown beyond one heir, beyond one fortune, beyond one family. It had become a living inheritance shared by all who chose loyalty over greed. And as the centuries turned, the world forgot Richard Coleman's scandal, forgot the courtroom battles, forgot the codicil that once made headlines. But they remembered Rufus, always Rufus, because in the end, it wasn't the money, the empire, or even the man who built it that endured. It was the dog who never asked for a fortune-only love and, in doing so, taught generations what true inheritance meant. And so Rufus and I remain beneath the oak, watching, guarding, waiting. Not for heirs, not for vultures, but for those who still believe in the only wealth worth guarding, loyalty, forever, generations past. En huitième, transformed as Transymbol to a place of legend. Children born long after my time knew nothing of court battles or codicils. What they knew was the story of a golden retriever whose loyalty had reshaped an empire. School teachers spoke of Rufus not as a curiosity, but as a parable, asterisk the dog who was trusted with millions. And the people who learned that loyalty was worth more than gold, asterisk the mansion itself changed, too. Its grand halls became classrooms and workshops. The old ballroom became a vast shelter, its chandeliers still glittering overhead, while rows of kennels lined the polished floors. Volunteers bustled through the corridors, not servants or heirs, but people who came because they believed in what the place represented. Every spring, a festival was held beneath the oak tree. They called it asterisk asterisk Rufus Day asterisk asterisk. Families brought their dogs. Children ran races across the lawns. And scholarships were awarded to students who had shown kindness, courage, and loyalty. No one cared about the Coleman name anymore except as the footnote of the man who had set the stage. The true hero, etched in every heart, was Rufus, and yet, on quiet evenings, when the last lanterns were extinguished and the grounds fell still, I remained. Not in body, not in name, but in spirit. I walked those corridors with Rufus at my side, unseen but ever present. When a child cried in fear their first night at the shelter, it was Rufus they dreamed of warm, golden, reassuring. When a young student hesitated to step into their future, it was my father's stern whisper they felt, urging them to prove themselves worthy. Time turned decades into centuries. The empire shifted, splintered, expanded, and adapted. Yet Rufus's bronze statue never left the oak tree. Weather wore it down, moss kissed its paws, but it never fell. Pilgrims came from faraway lands, not seeking wealth, but wisdom. They placed tokens at his feet, leashes, photos, collars of their own lost companions. The soil beneath the oak grew rich with offerings of love. One day, a great storm swept through, tearing shingles from the mansion and felling lesser trees. But the oak stood firm, its roots deep, its branches strong. When dawn broke, the villagers said they saw a shimmer beneath the tree, a golden light, and a figure kneeling beside the statue with a dog at their side. Some swore it was me, and Rufus returned for a moment to assure them the legacy would endure. Others called it folklore. But those who believed carried the story onward. And so, long after fortunes fade and names dissolve into dust, the true inheritance remains. Not the wealth, not the mansion, not the empire, but the lesson of a dog whose loyalty outshone greed, and the heir who chose to guard that loyalty until the end. Where still Rufus and's branches, eternal companions, eternal guardians. And when the world forgets the details, it will remember the truth, that love, once made inheritance, never dies. In the end, everything my father had built, the properties, The accounts, the empire that once seemed unshackable proved to be nothing more than a stage. Wealth drew out envy, family ties fractured under greed, and the name Coleman nearly drowned in scandal. But one simple truth endured, shining brighter than all the money in the world: loyalty. It was loyalty that exposed greed. Loyalty that safeguarded the fortune when all else threatened to destroy it. Loyalty that turned an inheritance from a curse into a living legacy. The Rufred Vidala only loved, Feindisha, and that was enough to reshape generations. The empire stands, not as a monument to power, but as proof that love is the only wealth worth leaving behind. Families come and go, fortunes rise and fall, but loyalty lives forever. That is the final conclusion of our story. The dog inherited the fortune, but loyalty inherited the world.